Hi, I'm Yannis. This is the GitLab Jamstack Incubation Showcase. What I'm working on right now is a feature for GitLab to allow users to deploy server-side JavaScript. This would be an amazing step to deploy modern JavaScript frameworks such as Remix, SvelteKit, or Next.js right from within GitLab without needing to set up a node server. I'm currently at a point where I have two viable ways of implementing that. One is using Cloudflare workers. I call this the Cloudflare track. The idea is that we're using this third-party service offered by Cloudflare to execute the JavaScript functions. As of today, users can do that themselves using a CI pipeline. The goal in this track is to connect to the Cloudflare API to simplify the steps involved. Project creation, updates, domain management. So in the end, we're putting a GitLab UI on top of existing functionality. We want to start this with a project level integration. This means users bring their own Cloudflare account and connect it with an API token. Once we were able to hide most of the complexities, we would then add it on an instance level. That means we're offering this runtime on GitLab's bill. For users, this would look like we just offer this runtime service ourselves, just like we do with shared runners. The other viable way to allow running JS server-side using GitLab is by executing V8 isolates directly in GitLab pages. I call this the pages track. This is way more experimental, but also a bit more interesting. Currently, GitLab Pages serves only static files, but it's written in Go, so it executes super fast. I have used this Go wrapper around the V8 JavaScript engine to translate a request made to the Go API into a JavaScript object and execute that. Then I obtain the result from JS and return that to the user. Let me show you. Here's a project in GitLab. It has some static HTML files just like how it always was, but now I can add a new file called request.js. Not set on the name yet, but let's call it request.js for now. I'll include a handler function inside that file that returns this response object. And just as an example, I'll commit that, and once the pages pipeline ran, I can visit the pages site. If I go to a path that has a static file, I'll receive the static file. But if I visit a path that doesn't exist within the file system, the request will then be forwarded to the JavaScript handler. And here we receive a response from JS. Now, this is an incredibly nice user experience, I think. It would also benefit self-managed GitLab users that use Pages but aren't able to connect to Cloudflare for whatever reason. But it obviously comes with a huge set of security unknowns. What does this mean for performance? Are we vulnerable to Spectre exploits? How do we prevent crypto mining? So what I want to do about this is to roll this out very slowly. First by dogfooding, then a closed beta, then an open beta. And at each step looking closely at the impacts. This should make some of these issues manageable since we can always keep the number of affected users under control. So what are my next steps? I'm currently working on both tracks kind of in parallel. My goal is to get either one of them live as soon as possible. The Pages track is more promising in terms of user experience. It's also faster to develop in Go than in the Rails monolith. But this track has more unknowns. On the Cloudflare track, on the other hand, I've worked for longer and it's more predictable. So for the decision, I needed an additional data point. I went ahead and created a short survey a couple of weeks ago. I sent it out to front-end and Jamstack developers. I wanted to see where their priorities are. I got 38 responses, both GitLab users and non-users. I've written up all the results in the handbook and put a link below the video, but here's a quick overview over the actual results. I wanted to know what are the services they currently use. An overwhelming amount of them use Netlify, with AWS and Versal close behind. People are interested in Cloudflare, but haven't used it quite as much. GitLab Pages ranges somewhere in the middle, but at least we have only few respondents who say they're not even interested in using it. Next, I wanted to know what features do users need for a JS runtime. So I let them rate a few statements from not important on this side to very important on this side. Here's the result. Is it important that there is a free tier? The answer is a resounding yes. All the competitive services have very generous free tiers, so it makes sense that this is expected now. People need to try the capabilities before making a commitment, after all. Second statement. A strong USP of GitLab Pages is that you can self-host it. This means it can be used on an org's own hardware or behind a VPN, and it's easier to follow legal requirements, for example. So I asked, how important is that for you? How important is it that whatever service we come up with integrates into an existing ecosystem? And the answer is not quite mandatory, but rather important. Even more so if we only look at the answers of people that have used GitLab before. Now, the one thing Cloudflare Workers has that we don't is an edge network. A network of hundreds of servers distributed around the globe to reduce network latency no matter where on earth you are. Is that important? The user's answers? Maybe. That's interesting because my first intuition was that this is super important, and it's the main reason I started the whole thing with Cloudflare Track. Now, the crucial difference for me in this whole two-track system is user experience on the one hand side versus feature completeness on the other hand. Cloudflare has all the features already done. API complete, a whole ecosystem. But the iterative approach would mean we're starting with a rather complicated developer experience. You have to create a Cloudflare account, obtain an API token, set it up in GitLab. And then we can work on making that process simpler with each iteration and integrate more into the UI. Using Pages, on the other hand, there's zero setup required from the start. You just drop a script where you've dropped static files before, done, works. But we'd have to build the whole ecosystem from scratch, the API, everything. So in the beginning, there's very few features, and each iteration, we would add new ones. So I asked the users to rate the high-level statement. Is it more important that it's easy to use or that it has feature completeness? Here's what they said. Please give me both. I should have known that would happen, but when it really comes down to it, ease of use clearly wins, especially if we only look at the answers where users felt really strongly about either. Now, let's abstract this into a product strategy. Say we have a distribution of potential users like this. Lots of small websites and a large long tail of increasingly complex sites. With Cloudflare, we can cater, in theory, to all of them, but as long as the setup is complicated with bringing your own account, only the long tail users would be willing to invest that effort. As we iterate, making the interface simpler, we move the target audience to the left. Using Pages, we're probably ignoring the long tail users to start with. We won't have the features they need. but we'd be able to cater to a way bigger chunk of quick and easy build and forget sites. And as we iterate, add features, we move to the right. So this would likely give us more instant feedback. It would create a bigger buzz. It looks like a more sensible approach. Okay, let's summarize. 1. I prefer the pages approach a bit more given the user feedback. 2. Both implementations would be able to coexist eventually, but I can probably only focus at one at a time. 3. But Pages has 2 open blocking security questions. Do we need to isolate closed beta users? And if yes, how do we do that? And 4, as long as those 2 questions aren't solved, I am prioritizing the Cloudflare approach. Once the blockers are resolved, I might switch priorities depending on their outcome. Alright, this was the Jamstack Incubation Engineering Showcase. I'll see you next time for a regular update. Thank you for watching. Until then, bye.